6 of Computer Programming 1, where we'll be looking at object oriented programming, right? So, we need to understand what object oriented programming is. Object oriented programming is a way to organize code by grouping related things together. Now, these groups are called classes, and the actual items are called objects, right? So, we use OOP to make code easier to manage. Now, there are key concepts you need to understand when creating OOP. The first is the classes. So, classes are the blueprints or recipe for creating objects, right? So, then the objects are the actual things you created using the blueprint. Then the attributes are the characteristics about the object, right, that describes the object, or like a properties. And the method is an action that describes the object. So let's assume that we want to create a class for animal, right? So let's say humans are animals, cats are animals. We have so many animals, right? So now let's what are the attributes that describe animals? So the attributes that describe animals are, let's assume, okay, every animal has a name, they have age, now they have size, and they make sound, right? So there are many attributes that describe animals. So these are just some of the attributes that describe animals. So now what are the methods for an animal? So action that objects can perform, right? So an animal is an object, right? So what are the actions? So animal can walk, animal can make sound, animal can run, right? So animal can talk. You can understand. So these are the methods that make up an animal. So OOP is like a concept. So it's a concept to be able to write this code to describe this, and we can be able to reuse it by creating other animals to be able to make use of that same function. That's what we'll be looking at here. We'll be looking at the properties of OOP. We'll be looking at abstraction, encapsulation, polymorphism, and then inheritance. Now it's very simple. All you just need to do is to understand how this works, right? Now, we need to understand the special method in Python, right? Because we are using Python. Now, there's a special method in Python called the double underscore. There is a init method which is double underscore. Then the init double underscore method in Python. So it's like a special method used in classes. So it is also known as a constructor. It is automatically called when you create an object of the class, right? So now, what does the init do? Now, the init method initializes an object by setting its initial attributes. So that's what I want to do here. So what I want to do here is I'll create a script, an empty script here. I'll call it OOP.py, right? So now let's because as you know, we have a class called animal. Okay, we have a class called animal like this, right? Then we have the constructor. It's like a constructor like this. So we have our self. Then I'll pass in my attributes here. But you need to understand what self is. So now you can see that self here is a keyword that refers to the current object. So it ensures that the attributes belong to the specific object being created, right? It ensures that the attributes belong to the specific objects being created. Right? Take note of this, right? Take note of the self, right? Take note of the definition. So now we'll pass in our attributes here, which are every animal has a name, every animal has age, then every animal makes sound, right? So let's use this tree. So the more attributes, I just use this tree to demonstrate this example here, right? So I'll pass have myself dot name now equal to the name, self dot age equal to age, self dot sound equal to sound, right? So now, before I move further, we need to understand what we call the access modifier. Now, in Python, we have three types of access modifier, which are the public, the private, and then the protected. Or the public, the protected, and private. That's what I'm going to take in step. Now, by default, every data or attributes like this, in this case here, we have the attributes here, the name, age, sound, right? The name, the self.name, the self.age, and the self.sound. By default, they are public. Now, the reason why they are public is because they can be accessed outside this class. Remember, this is a class animal. Now, let's assume that, oh, sorry. So let's assume that I have a simple function like get name. So what this function does is just return the name of the animal, which is return self.name. Alright, so I'll pass in my format so that sorry, outside the string, so I can be able to return this self.name. Now, if I have this is my test.py, right? This is my test which is empty. Now, if I'm calling this OOP, I'm calling this script, let's say from OOP import everything here, right? Now, I have a variable called, let's assume that I have a variable called cat. Then I want to call this animal, right? So I'm calling this animal. So now the animal, if you go here, the animal by default it has three parameters here: one, name, age, and sound. So now if I'm passing the arguments here, I'll pass a tree. So the name, let's assume that the name is cat, right? Then the age is 2. Then the sound is mew. I don't know if my mew is correct, but just okay. So now let's assume that, so I want to print cat dot the name, right? If I'm printing cat dot name, what it will return for me? So this is py test dot py. So it will return cat, right? It's returning cat because the name is a public identifier. The name is a public identifier, right? So going to the PowerPoint slide here. Now, in Python, data members' attributes can be defined as private, protected, or public, which determines how they can be accessed and modified. Unlike some languages like C++ plus plus or Java, so Python doesn't enforce strict access control. Instead, it relies on naming conventions to indicate the intended level of access. So I've explained what public data is. So the public attributes are accessible from anywhere, inside and outside the class. So by default, all attributes in Python are public, which I've shown you guys, right? So now let's look at protected. Now, protected attributes are intended to be accessed only within the class and its subclasses. Now, when we say subclasses, we mean something like this. So this is a class. So if I'm creating a subclass, right, I will create a class like this again, right? Then let's assume the class is a cat, then have this. So this is like inheriting from this class here called animal, right? Is inheriting from this class called animal, right? So let's assume that I have def init, right? Def init, then this is the self, then name, age, and the sound, right? Name, age, and sound, right? So this is another class called cat, right? So this is the constructor. Now, instead of me writing the self.name, self.range here, right? Because I'm inheriting from this class, this is a subclass and this is a parent class. Because I'm inheriting from this class, what I just need to do is to write a function called a super dot the init, right? So I'll just pass the name, age, and sound, right? So automatically it will inherit everything here, right? It will collect everything here. That's what the super does. So, but this is not actually the lecture. So for us to make it protected, for us to make this data, which is self.name, self.age, self.is protected, we need to use a single underscore like this. So it means that this name has been protected. A single underscore like this, it means that the age has been protected. It means a single this. It means that the sound has been protected, right? So this is a subclass. This is so what it's trying to tell you is that the protected data can be accessed within the subclasses, right? Within a subclasses, and this is a subclass because it's inheriting from the parent class, right? So do something. Let's try a method here. Let's try a method called uh, get name self. So when we're looking at polymorphism, I will explain this better. So let's look at return. The cat is making a new sound. Let's assume that we have this, right? So Uh, okay, let me use this self.name, then self.sound. So, so for me to be able to get this value, I have to put F here, right? So now if I want to run this, right? If I want to run this, you can see that these are actually protected data, right? If I want to run this in the test.py here, right? So now let's assume here we have my cat, because I've already created this. So let's assume we have cat.name here. So if I run this, so cat has an attribute name. Do you mean name? So test dot name like this, right? It will actually show the cat because by default the data can be accessed publicly, because in Python protected data are indicated by a single underscore, which I've done. So this is a convention but not a strict rule. They can still be accessed from outside the class, right? That's why we can access that. So they can still be accessed outside the class but are considered part of the class internal implementation. So you can see now using the protected data, we can still access that outside the class, right? You can see it returns a cat, right? But using a private data, we cannot access it outside the class. So we use private data using the underscore, double underscore. So here, if you have a double underscore here, right? If you have a double underscore here, so what we are returning here. So if I'm to test this now, if I put a double underscore here, this is what happens. Can't object has no attribute name, right? But there's what we call name mangling, where we can be able to access it using name mangling, which is not actually a good should I call it good this is not actually a good design, right? But we can actually use name mangling to access this. Now to do that is, now we have this cat dot, right? So now here we have this animal, right? This is a class name. So what I will do here in this test.py here is the cat dot single underscore, the name of the class is animal, that has which where we set the attributes called name, right? Then double underscore name. So if you return this to actually give you cards, this is what we call name mangling. First underscore the name of the class and then the private data, it will return the card, right? But this is not actually a good design. But that is a private data. So private data in Python is double underscore, protected data is single underscore, and the public data there is no underscore, just the name of data, right? So now let's continue. So we have understood the private data, we understood the protected data, we understood the public data, right? So now you can see that Python uses name mangling in the private data to make these attributes harder to access directly from outside the class, but not impossible. So we have seen how possible it is for us to access the private data using what? Name mangling, right? So now let's look at in the next lesson, right? Our next lesson is going to be looking at all the properties of OOP, which are the encapsulation, abstraction, polymorphism, and inheritance. They can be able to understand that because in many Python job interviews, right, most of the questions has to do with OOP. So they believe that if you can be able to understand OOP very well and that structure, then you are good to go. Then they can be able to you can be able to blend into their company. So you need to understand OOP very well. So when they give you a task, you can be able to write a very good and clean code. So thank you and God bless you. In lesson 6B, we're going to be looking at all the properties of OOP.